My name is Diehl, and I have been with the Interreligious Council, or the Humanists of Linn County, for about a year on their board, and also act as a representative with the Interreligious Council, and which has worked out well given my background. I grew up here on the northwest side of Cedar Rapids and attended a independent fundamental Baptist church, as we referred to ourselves, hellfire, damnation, blow in the bottle, spit in the sand, swing from the chandelier, Baptists. In fact, yeah, well, now I will say though, Southern Baptists we didn't look too kindly on them, I'm afraid, and I remember as a young kid a statistic that always resonated in my mind, that from a speaker that used to travel around. He would tell me that he truly believed that 90 to 95% of Southern Baptists were going to hell when they died. And people would thought, how could that be? And of course he went into this whole theological dissertation of why that is. But that was my life growing up, and Christian school my whole life, and then actually went into the ministry, went to a Bible college in Illinois for 4 years, became an ordained minister, bachelor's degree in pastoral theology. And then I had went on to serve in Nebraska as associate pastor for 5 years, where I oversaw their school, taught Sunday school, taught in the high school, was their worship leader, all kinds of things, wore a lot of hats. And then over that time period, a lot of doubts arose in my mind. And about 8 years ago, I went to our senior pastor and said, I just can't do this anymore. He was very gracious. He said, well, tell me what you're having problems with. Wrote out a big laundry list of items. Long story short, a few months later, he said, it's probably time for you to go. I packed up, called my parents, couldn't get the words out. It was just, and of course my dad is like, well, son, I'll pray for your soul. And a very, very unusual situation occurred in which, and Dr. Avalos and others that have come out of religion can attest to this, you go from baptizing people on a Sunday morning, witnessing door to door as we used to do, praying for the lost souls of your neighbors, to now becoming a lost soul yourself. So psychologically, it was quite the thing to overcome, along with the fact that I lost my job and my friends and my house, and having to go through that. So went back to school and got a job, and currently now I'm a project manager at Transamerica, which is a large insurance company here in town, dealing with retirement plans. Anyway, so that's my story. And so I want to talk about something that's kind of a bit of a sideshow a little bit. I mean, kind of a little ancillary to what we're talking about here, but that is specifically life after death and what the Bible has to say about it, and generally people's changing beliefs on the matter. And before I do that, though, I was going to, I think, is it Kevin, right? The one who gave the presentation earlier, right, Kevin? Yeah. You had mentioned the fact that there is no mention of suicide or assisted suicide in the Bible. And I started thinking about that, and I'm thinking to myself, well, wait a second. I'm pretty sure there is. And I don't know if anybody knows where I'm going with this or not. But Luke 23:46 actually says this, and this is per the internet. I'm going to go with, there's like 15 translations. How about the Berean Study Bible says, then Jesus called out in a loud voice, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And when he had said this, he breathed his last breath. And of course, this is Jesus now determining to take his own life. But of course, I was questioning, well, is that suicide or assisted suicide? Because him and the Father are one, but either it's got to be one or the other. So there is a perfect example of the founder of the Christian religion taking his own life. So I don't know if that's an example for the rest of us, but I thought it quite interesting anyways.
I call that divine child abuse.
That's right, that's right. But I had never thought about that until you said it, and then it just popped in my mind. I'm like, was he committing suicide? And you start looking at it, I'm like, I need to look at that in the Greek and do a little more study there. But I think it's more do as I say, not as I do. I don't know. Anyway, so I know we were kind of short on time and running a little behind time, but I'll get right into this, and hopefully this works. All right, so what do we know about people's beliefs regarding the afterlife? And certainly people have strong beliefs about it. If you're atheist, Baptist, whatever it may be. Well, we do know that people's beliefs about death and the supposed afterlife will continue to evolve and change. We know that to be the case. If you look at any history of any religion, if you look at societies, even in existence today, they vary and they change constantly. That is the one thing we can be sure of. What should we do? Well, I think the goal with all of this is to bring the truth and the good together, right? So even if it means that, as far as we can tell, there is no afterlife, well, we deal with it, right? And as most atheists believe that there is no life after death. And so there is a way, I believe, if we can embrace that idea, and that there can be good that can come from it, and we can hopefully make society better for it as we embrace life in the short time we have here. All right, well, so what does the Bible, and that's what my talk is really about here, is what the Bible says about supernatural existence and the afterlife. We all know people have beliefs about it, and it really just does vary from person to person. I'm sure even in this room, there's probably a half dozen different beliefs about what may or may not occur in an afterlife. And certainly if you go to different churches, you're going to have different opinions. And even if you go in the same church, you're going to have different opinions within that pew itself. So why is that? Doesn't the Bible paint a very clear picture of what it means for a person to die and where they go? Well, let's see. What did the ancient Hebrews in the Old Testament, what did it have to say? What did that group believe about the afterlife and about death in general? You know, and interestingly enough, some of this may be not new to you, and maybe something you've looked at and studied. And I can say I've done a little bit of a study in the past, but diving into this a little bit more, there's definitely some surprises there. And most of the time when you do read the Bible, you are surprised, right? Because you kind of have a caricature in your mind of what it is. But what do they believe? Well, one of the very first passages that I feel is a very beautiful passage, and even if you're an atheist or agnostic, I challenge you to read the Bible. I mean, from a strictly historical perspective, the Bible contains a lot of beautiful language, and it can be very interesting to see what did the ancients believe. Now, the book of Job is typically thought to be written somewhere between the 7th and 4th century BC. But here we see in the book of Job, we see Job lamenting about his situation, and those are probably all familiar with the story of Job and how his family was taken away from him, and he had disease, and all of this, of course, requested by Lucifer and authorized by God, by Yahweh. But he says here, and I do want to read this passage because I felt it was very, very good. My flesh, this is Job talking, and he's lamenting, my flesh is clothed with worms and clods of dust. My skin closeth up and breaketh out afresh. My days are swifter than a weaver's shuttle. That must be pretty swift. I have no idea what a weaver's shuttle is. I was going to look it up, and I'm like, nah, nobody's interested in that. Okay. And are spent without hope. Oh, remember that my life is a breath. Done. Mine eyes shall no more see good. Job, he was aware of the fact that he was not going to experience any good on this earth. The eye of him that seeth me shall behold me no more. Thine eyes shall be upon me, but I shall not be. So what did he say? The eye of him that seeth me shall behold me no more. There's no belief in an afterlife here in Job's lamentation. As the cloud is consumed and vanisheth away, so he that goeth down to Sheol, which we'll talk a little bit about here, shall come up no more. There's no rapture, there's no final judgment, there's none of this in Job's theology and in Judaism in the Hebrew tradition in that day. He shall return no more to his house, neither shall his place know him any more. So these are pretty sobering thoughts. And of course, if you're a Christian, these are inspired thoughts, right? These are inspired words from God communicating to man what we should believe about death, life, the spirit, soul. Therefore, I will not refrain my mouth. I will speak in the anguish of my spirit. I will complain in the bitterness of my soul. And that's from the American Standard Version. So again, just a person, whether it was real or not, probably not a real person, but certainly it was a writer in 25, 26, 700 years ago talking about what he felt, and it's certainly within the Hebrew tradition, life was going to be beyond the grave, in which was no life. So I want to talk about this idea of the Hebrew soul. And that's what I want to first talk about here. And I'm going to move through this rather quickly. But just interestingly enough, you hear a lot about in today's culture the soul, the spirit, how it interacts and how it survives the body beyond the grave. I saw something on the news just yesterday about some guy who was going by in a traffic accident or something. He caught on his camera the soul of somebody rising out of the body of a person. So it's certainly a popular idea. But what did the Hebrews, what did they believe about it? Well, there's a Hebrew word called nephesh. I'm not sure the true pronunciation. But this is the same word used many times in the Old Testament to describe the soul, the spirit, appetite, beast, body, breath. You can go down the line here. There was one word for all of these different characteristics, or as we'll see, and I'll show it to you here in a little bit. Genesis 1:21 is one of the very first mentions of this idea of nephesh. What is it? And God created great whales and every living creature that moveth, with which the waters brought forth abundantly. So right away, the Hebrews thought nephesh, or the soul, was also synonymous with creature. Essentially, anything that has breath, anything that moves, anything that has blood in it, as we'll see. This is their way of describing what it means to have life. They had no idea truly what it was. So they had this one word, and you'll see how many ways they use it. And it's very fascinating. Genesis 2:7, and the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground, okay? So Ken Ham in the creation science, those are familiar with him, likes to, and others like to make fun of the idea of evolution, right? And man arising from, molecules to man evolution. How ridiculous is that? Certainly, no, it didn't happen that way. It was God formed man out of rocks and put him together in a matter of seconds. That makes a lot more sense, but I'm on a rabbit trail. And he breathed into his nostrils the breath of nephesh, of life, and man became a living soul. So again here, we have them struggling with this idea of what does it mean to be alive? And for them here, it has something to do with breath. They're struggling to figure out what it is. But I'm contrasting this with the idea of today, which is, no, the soul and the spirit is separate. It has something to do with consciousness. It is immaterial. This was a foreign concept to the Hebrews and the writers of the Old Testament. But flesh with the life thereof, which is the blood thereof, shall ye not eat, and surely the blood of your lives will I require. So here we have them making a connection between there's the soul, if you will, the nephesh is the blood. It seems to them that things that have blood move around, you can interact with. This must be the soul. This must be the nephesh. Deuteronomy 14:26, and thou shalt bestow that money for whatsoever thy soul lusteth after, for oxen or for sheep. So here we have the soul lusting. We have the soul, we have this and you'll see here as we go along, it starts to take on very human characteristics. So we have it conflated with a physical action, which even confuses the idea more. And this is the whole point of this, is they were confused. They didn't have a way to really describe what was going on, and there's no fault of their own. They certainly didn't understand as much as we do today. But the soul, which hath touched any such, shall be clean until even. So what is the soul here? Is it now a lot of the translations say the person. So is a soul touching things now all of a sudden? Is it material? Is it immaterial? Again, so here we have people's ideas today being contrasted with what the Bible actually taught, or what at least people believed. Ezekiel 18:4, behold, all souls are mine. The soul of the Father as well the soul of the Son is mine. The soul who sins will die. So now souls are mortal? Well, I thought souls were immortal and survive the body. Well, it just does appear that they believe that the soul was connected, if you will, or just one with the body. There was no difference, and it died just like anything else. Genesis 35:17. when she was in severe labor, the midwife said to her, "Do not fear, for now you have another son." It came about as her soul was departing. I believe this is in the, I think this was Sarah, I can't remember. But anyways, it doesn't matter. And so her soul was departing. So now we start seeing it as somewhat separate from the body. So as with everything in the Bible, you can use any particular verse to prove any particular theological position or worldview, if you will. And that's, of course, the beauty of the Bible and why it has survived and thrived as much as it is, right? Because it can become all things to all people. 1 Kings 17:21, then he stretched himself upon the child and called the Lord and said, O Lord, my God, I pray you, let this child's life return to him. Again, life being nephesh. All right, so now we're going to turn to, and I'm moving along quickly here, there's a lot of interesting stuff I want to talk about, but this idea of Sheol, or the afterlife within the Hebrew tradition. Some of you, I'm sure, have heard this word before. And what is it exactly? And it suffers from the same thing that nephesh did, in that it's just used in all kinds of ways that we'll see here, and that are quite interesting. So this is a kind of an illustration of what the ancients, at least the Hebrews, believed the world to look like, all right? You have up here the heavens, right, as referred to in Genesis, way up there. Essentially, this is probably where God, Yahweh, lives up there. Then you have waters above the firmament. That was, of course, melted during the flood and caused all the flooding and allowed Noah to float on the ark. That's common sense. Everybody should know that. And then, of course, the stars were attached to the firmament, but unfortunately the stars didn't fall when the firmament melted. Somehow, I don't know, they went back up in the sky where they belong. Anyways, but then you have the earth where people lived. And then, of course, as the Bible mentions, there's the pillars of the earth that hold up. And again, we shouldn't be too hard on these people. They didn't have satellites and the technology we have today, but for a lot of them, they believed in a place below the earth called Sheol. This was not a hell. This was not, as we conceive of today, as a horrible place of suffering or anything like that. It was just simply a physical place that people went when they died, right? A shadowy existence of some sort. Again, a lot of people had different ideas of what it would be. And then below that, of course, you had the oceans out here, and then you just had this abyss that really nobody knew exactly what that was. And then, of course, we don't ask what the pillars are sitting on. I'm not sure what it was, giant elephants or something like that. Numbers 16:32, and the Lord, this is a story of Korah. Just a quick illustration here. The children, Korah and a few other people, Israelites, rebelled against Moses and questioned his authority, questioned the fact, did God really put you in this position? So he led a rebellion, and Moses said, well, I'll tell you what, if you die of natural causes, then I'm not God's appointed man. But if God does something amazing, then I am God's appointed man. And what do you know? What happens? And the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up, and their households and all the men who belonged to Korah with their possessions. So they and all that belonged to them went down alive to Sheol. There we go, in that place. And the earth closed over them, and they perished from the midst of the assembly. All Israel who were around them fled at their outcry, for they said, the earth may swallow us up. Well, the people that didn't get swallowed up didn't get away that easily, of course. There were still some that continued to rebel and still questioned his authority, and so God sent fire down from heaven and consumed almost 15,000 people in an instant, in addition to those that were swallowed up. So suffice it to say, Moses solidified his leadership position. I'm sure people weren't, I don't know if I would question can you imagine that? Oh my goodness. I was just thinking of the uprising in Turkey. Can you imagine if the president said, I'm just going to swallow everybody up? Oh boy. Stuff like that doesn't happen for some reason today. I don't know exactly why. It would be nice though. It'd be quite interesting. But here it is. Here's an example. I don't know if this is an actual photograph, but it may be. I think it's like an old Polaroid or something. But I found this on the internet, and so here is Korah and some of his pals, and I think that's Moses up there. And here, the Ark of the Covenant, I don't know if that gets almost swallowed up. But now we have fire here, but there's really no mention of fire being down there, just that the earth is swallowed up. Again, the concept of Sheol containing fire and hell, that certainly wasn't the belief at the time. But anyways, this is, I believe, from the 16th century. So moving along very quickly, moving on to the idea of heaven in the Hebrew tradition, Shamayim, as it was known. What does the Bible say about that? Where can I go from your spirit, or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, behold, you are there. God was everywhere. It wasn't, today we think of hell or Sheol, being separated from God. It's kind of the sanitized version of hell. It's simply just a separation. Well, there was no separation. God was present everywhere. All right, so there's a change in people's belief. And he said, O Lord, the God of our fathers, are you not God in the heavens? Are you not ruler over all the kingdoms of the nations? So again, people believed heaven, Shamayim, was a place up in the sky. Absolutely. God was in the clouds. He was above the clouds. He was up in the firmament somewhere. This was heaven. Certainly no other dimension, immaterial, eternal world that is popular today, right? No, there is no concept of that whatsoever. God was up there along with the other deities and supernatural beings. Yahweh, I should say. Then Moses went up with Aaron and 70 of the elders, and they saw the God of Israel. And under his feet there appeared to be a pavement of sapphire, as clear as the sky itself. So somehow they were able to peer in heavens and see what God was walking on. Again, it would be nice if we had some pictures, but unfortunately I looked on the internet and couldn't find any. Jeez, just when you need a camera. Okay. So now moving on to Jesus and the New Testament. What did he say about the afterlife, the soul? And this is where, of course, it gets very interesting, and you could spend hours and hours and hours, but I only have seconds, so I'm going to move along. But certainly there was major influence between the Old and New Testament, Greek tradition, and so on and so forth, that influenced a lot of the evolution of the beliefs about the afterlife and death and the soul and the spirit. And you see Jesus, of course, being influenced by this in the writers of the New Testament. What is the writer of Matthew says, "You have said it yourself," Jesus answered, "but I say to all of you, from now on you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." So even Jesus himself believed that heaven was in the clouds, that it was up there, right? That's where it was. And then, of course, here we have a great illustration of hell, the famous story of the rich man and Lazarus. And so I'll just focus on read this very quickly. The rich man also died and was buried in Hades, where he was being in torment. Here we see the evolution of Sheol, of the afterlife. In Hades, where he was in torment, he looked up and saw Abraham afar away. So now all of a sudden we see Sheol kind of split into two as people tried to understand more and more about the punishment of wicked people and the reward of the righteous, which again was a very kind of Greek thought. In Hades, where he was in torment, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. So now he can see these people. He's down in Hades, so he called him, "Father Abraham, have pity on me and send Lazarus to dip the tongue of his finger and cool my tongue, because I'm in agony in this fire." So Jesus now, for the very first time, is introducing the idea of fire in hell, right? In Sheol. But Abraham replied, "Son, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things, while Lazarus received bad things, but now he is comforted here and you are in agony. And besides all this, between us and you a great chasm has been set in place," right? "So that those who want to go from here to you cannot, nor can anyone cross over from there to us." Now, a lot of scholars say this was a metaphorical, this was not a real event. Jesus, the writers of the Gospels, didn't make that clear, and there's still an argument whether he's referring to a real situation or not. But nonetheless, we have this idea of the physical world interacting with the spiritual. There wasn't really a distinction here. People, at least in their minds, could communicate, and could communicate both in the spiritual world but in the physical world as well. And again, we see the evolution of what it means to go to Sheol and hell. And here we do have another distinct depiction from the 16th century. This is in a British museum. We have these demons carrying the rich man to what is Hades, which again, there's this great chasm between probably what is here paradise and Hades, and these demons doing this devilish work of digging holes, and there's the rich man going to suffer his punishment for being successful in life. All right, but so anyways, I thought that was quite interesting. But I'm going to end with this because I'm out of time. But this is extremely fascinating and maybe not new to a lot of you. But this is from the book of Revelations, and it is truly, although I know I read it many times as a Christian, and I'm sure many Christians do, but for some reason they just don't see it. Book of Revelations 21, 1 through 4 says this, and this is again the continued evolvement of heaven, the afterlife, and people's confusion, and just all these different ideas being smashed into one book called the Bible, and then trying to make it all work together. But here's what John says during his vision of the future, when he was caught up, as the book of Revelation says. He says, "Then I saw," this is John speaking, "a new heaven and a new earth." All right, so we're really referring to a new sky, that heaven, and a new earth. "For the first heaven," all right, this place that where God, Yahweh was, and he was up in the clouds, "had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city," which is the New Jerusalem, "coming down out of heaven from God." So this is a depiction of what's going to happen in the future, right? And this really is central to Christian theology and to Islam, and it, of course, has a major influence. But I saw the New Jerusalem coming down out of heaven from God. So now you actually have this city, 1,500 miles high, 1,500 miles wide, as the dimensions are given later on in the passage, that comes down out of heaven after the 1,000-year reign, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. I have no idea what that means. A giant city in a pair of lingerie or something? I don't know. Who knows? I looked for that picture on. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people." So God's in the sky, but now he's going to come down and live forever with the people on earth. And again, is this completely contrasted with the idea today of what heaven is? No, when I die, my body is transported into another universe outside of, space-time and blah, blah, blah. That's the average response you get. When I have tons of Christian friends, and we talk about this all the time, and that's kind of the general consensus, but I'm thinking this is just so disconnected from what the Bible actually says on the issue. Anyways. Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and you dwell with them. Don't worry, I got a picture of it coming up, so all right. "They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God, and he will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death." And again, he will wipe every tear from their eyes. This changes who people are. It gets into all kinds of crazy stuff. "But there will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away." And fortunately, John did have a camera with him, and there she is. Isn't that something? So, that is, of course, what, that is. So this is what you can expect, from a Christian perspective, that one day, apparently, everybody will live in that cube up there, but we'll be able to possibly visit here, but it will just be a continuation of life on earth. Again, the point of this whole presentation, it's a bit of a sideshow, I realize, and there's a very serious subject we're talking about here, so this is just simply, hopefully, of an interest to some people. But this is what some of the holy books teach, and of course, people can believe whatever they want, and I have no problem with that. But it is interesting sometimes when people of certain faiths criticize other people for their crazy and strange beliefs. And say, well, this is what the Bible actually teaches. So that was my presentation. I hope you thought it was interesting. And again, I encourage you, read the Bible. It's a very fascinating book. And I'll be quite honest with you. Since I became an atheist, I would consider myself an atheist probably a good 6 years now, and probably really came more public with it in the last several years. But the Bible, for me, has become much, much, much more fascinating than it ever was. It used to be, as a Christian, a complete drag, which I felt to be quite ironic. I mean, you would think the most interesting book on the planet would be the Bible, the fact that it was written by an omniscient, omnipotent being, but in fact it was just the opposite. It was the most boring book you could pick up, which is quite interesting. But today it's not. I mean, today it's like every passage you read, it's like, wow, because you're just considering all the different factors here. And blah, blah. I got to stop talking. I had too much coffee. You have a question?
How does this concept of the afterlife compare to other major religions on the planet?
I think Dr. Avalos probably could speak better to that than myself. I'm going to be quite honest with you. No, I mean, I certainly have researched some, and there's tons of different religions out there, and there's... Okay, I'll just put it this way. Within Christianity itself, I mean, there's probably like 100 different beliefs about what the afterlife is going to look like, what the soul or the heaven's going to look like. And I'm sure within those particular religions, you're going to have the same dilemma. So to even begin to comment on what the afterlife doesn't look like or does look like is... I mean, I've sat in services in large... I mean, I'm talking about big conferences with 10,000 Baptists, and people get up, pastors, authority figures get up and try to describe heaven and all these insane things they try to pull out of the Bible to paint this amazing picture of what the afterlife is going to look like. We're going to be able to see in all 11 dimensions at one time, and taste sight and hear, light, and just all this, So to even begin to scratch the surface of how it compares to other things. I mean, there'd be a lot of Christians that say, well, I don't believe that. Revelations isn't something I consider to be actually, literal by any means. So you run into that, but that's...
So what you're saying is pretty much anything we can dream up or
yes.
the human imagination can conjure up, it's going to be okay.
Well, see, that's...
Providing we write a book about it and sell one.
No. Actually, I mean, I think there's a bit of an illusion oftentimes with people. They have their belief system, and they develop a belief system through a ton of different factors: their upbringing, society influences, their chemical makeup in their brain, you name it. And then they go back and kind of superimpose that upon the Bible, and then the mind does a trick and says, the Bible supports what I believe, right? And it just takes a little bit of self-awareness to realize that's actually happening. Is there anything else? I know I'm probably way past my time, but...
I just want to say one thing. This looks disturbingly like the board. And the other thing is, to your point, heaven and the afterlife concept is so completely different. When my mother was dying, they had recently got a new pastor in her church. And she never really liked him. She didn't want him involved in her funeral, but he had to be involved. It was a whole mess. But he came into her room, and this is probably within the last week of her life, and she was telling him, well, I really wish I could have gotten to the Grand Canyon and to Niagara Falls. And he said, truthfully, let me tell you, the heaven that I believe in is just like here, only better and brighter, and you're going to go there. And he left the room, and my mom turned to me, and she said, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
But people are attracted to that, right? I mean, people are attracted to the idea of just, tell me about this place. And, yeah.
Just an interesting thought. Ecclesiastes 9:2 says, it is the same for all. There is one fate for the righteous and for the wicked.
Yep. Yep.
So
Yeah,
renders all the same mood, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Ecclesiastes, I didn't even want to go there, because, Ecclesiastes basically is the atheist Bible, right? I mean, it truly is. If you could just snatch that out of there and just call it that, it's pretty much what it is. Yep.
Everything is a subject to interpretation. I see a TARDIS with a bunch of spotlights shining
Yeah.
from below. I think it'd make a perfect cremation ashes be a vessel.
Yeah. No, it's,
Sit on the table.
wow.
Actually, it looks like the Kronos machine from the movie that name in 1957, this giant walking robot that smashed the city. It walks around.
Yeah. No.
I know who the biggest nerd is.
We knew before though, didn't we really?
You mentioned suicide in the Bible.
Mhm.
Did Judas commit suicide?
Yeah, he did, right. Yep. Yep. And there's actually multiple stories about Judas and how he actually did go through with it. And of course, the Gospel of Judas has a different account, and the Gospels, the Synoptic Gospels, are actually contradict each other on their actual story of what he did. But yeah, he did commit suicide and apparently was judged for it in some. Well, it was certainly portrayed as a negative event. Yes.
Well, it seems to me that with every religion or even ourselves, we try and make up these stories to help bring us comfort for something that we can't know and understand, and it kind of goes back to our inability to deal with our own impermanence.
And uncertainty.
Yeah.
Right. And that kind of, it gets back to the issue we're talking today about death, and just how important it is to bring that to the front of our minds, as we go throughout our lives, because we don't know, when that will come. And, sometimes if we have the chance to be able to plan for it, and to, allow folks to kind of come along with that journey, then, that is helpful. But I think this is a good time to do today.
And I'll take your last question. I just want to close with this. My grandma's 90 years old, going to be 91, great health, but she's at the point where my grandfather died about 10 years ago. She's very religious, and she wants to see her husband really, really bad. And I mean, to the point she's getting rid of her stuff. And although she's in perfect health, she's like, I am ready to die. Let's get this thing over with. And she'll ask me, and we have fascinating conversations on the porch for hours on end, right? Me and her, we just kind of click. And she always asks me, we've talked about things, am I going to be able to see him again, right? And I'm thinking to myself, what am I going to say? Well, no, you're not. You're not going to ever see him again. Well, first of all, that would be pretty presumptuous and pretty, for me to say that, I know for 100% certain that you're not, and I'm going to make sure you suffer to the end of your life knowing you're never going to be able to see him again. So no, I just say, I don't know. I hope you can. I hope you do. That'd be great. That's really what I'm going to tell people. Now, if people want to ask my opinion on it and really get into it and it's in the right situation, then yeah, we'll go there and say why I think it's not reasonable to believe in an afterlife. But certainly I'm not going to go and try to spoil somebody, in that situation. So I'm very sensitive to, people's situation. That really does go back to hospice and end of life. And, you have to, it's a complicated subject for sure.
If God is omniscient, then the crucifixion is suicide, because he could have prevented it.
I know. That's the point. I mean, killed himself, or did God kill him? If it gets.
But is it true from your reading of the Bible that in heaven there is no beer?
Well, that's why we drink it here.
That's right.
72 birthdays.
Yeah. So I think with that, I'll go ahead and just. I'll go ahead and be quiet from now on. So thank you very much for the.